It will be almost 20 years soon. You first time published this book.
Yes.
Can you tell me what changed the most regarding time management and productivity?
The range of audience that need it. That's what's most changed. The methodology is old as dirt. I mean, even 50 years from now, they still need an in basket. You still need to decide next actions. You still need to do these best practice behaviors if you want to be productive with as little effort as possible. That's true forever. What's different is how many people in the world now are feeling overwhelmed, confused, got so much stuff to do. They're in the stress of opportunity, especially with all the social media. And so there are just that many more people that are interested in it. See, when the book was first published in 2001, that was when the tsunami of email was hitting the high-end professionals. So the book was really targeted in my language and the examples to the fast-track professional. They were the hungriest people for it and willing to, get training and coaching about it. Now, though, and I knew it back then, it worked equally well for students, for the clergy, for stay-at-home dads, for anybody with a busy life, can use this. So now there are just that many more people, I think, that can need it. That's why I wrote a revised edition 3 years ago to address more of the general public's need for this kind of methodology.
Revised edition was more digital, as I could say.
Actually less so. The reason was I actually talked about some digital tools in the first edition because people were not that aware of how they could use digital tools, Outlook or Palm Pilot or Lotus Notes or some of the other tools. And I wanted to let them know that those can be really great list managers. Now, over the last 5 or 10 years, there have been over 300 applications that have been built around the getting things done model, but they're basically all just list managers. What I didn't want to do was to date the book by talking about any specific technology now. It's really more about the thought process, and you can use any technology to implement it.
Actually, we are at the conference HRmeeting, and how does connect GTD with human resources or managing people?
Well, it's really all about attention and are people focused on the right things. And, people talk about time management, but you can't manage time. You can only manage what you do during time, and what you manage is your attention, your focus, and your activity. So defining what activities you have to do and making sure that you're as clear as you can be so that you're present and focused on the most meaningful stuff is really a personal skill set that's required. So it is absolutely critical behavior, and many large corporations now have found that this methodology is really important for their cultures.
Did you experience in large corporations introduction of GTD and maybe some rules you will have to do GTD here?
No, I think it's hard to legislate a system like that for people. I think what you can do is educate people about it, give them the model, and say, here is the set of best practices. How people implement it is quite unique to each individual and what their job is, what their style is, and so forth. So that's why it's not a legislated structure so much. It's a very specific methodology. For instance, one of the key elements is to make sure that you capture things that have your attention that you can't finish when you think of it, capture in some external form. What you capture it in could be digital, could be a paper, could be anything. So the methodology is very pristine, but how you implement it is very unique to each individual. And so, and also the best practices are really good business practices. They're outcome thinking and action thinking. And those are the two elements of productivity. What are we trying to produce? And how do we allocate or reallocate our resources to move toward making that happen and completing that? So action and outcome thinking, you're not born doing. You actually need to learn to do that better. What does this email mean to me? What am I going to do about it? What do I do with it? And if I can't finish it right now, how do I organize that in some way so that I can see what the inventory of my work is? I mean, the late Peter Drucker, the American guru of management, and all that, said that the toughest thing for a knowledge worker is to define what their work is. So he didn't tell you how to do it. That's what my methodology did. Here's how you define what your projects are, what your actions are. How do you create some sort of an external brain that has that inventory available to you, so you're making smarter choices about what you do.
Yeah, maybe starting with why.
Starting with why, for sure, yeah.
Okay, you probably experienced a lot of people coping with time management productivity. What do you think is the most hardest thing for them to solve?
The hardest thing is for people to stop using their head as their office. Your head is a terrible office. Your brain did not evolve to remember, remind, prioritize, or manage relationships with more than 4 things. That's new cognitive science has validated that. But I learned 35 years ago that your head's for having ideas, but not for holding them. So the biggest thing in the way of people is that they're still trying to manage their life in here, and it's almost impossible to do that really, really well. And you tend to be driven by whatever's latest and loudest in your world, as opposed to your intuitive intelligence.
What's the most difficult part of implementing GTD according to you?
Well, there are some basic behaviors that keep your head clear. First of all, capturing the things that are on your mind that are not finished, that you have attention on. Second thing is deciding what exactly you're going to do about those things, what action step is required, and if more than one action is needed, what's the project? That's a clarify step. Organize, once I decide what the action is, if I can't finish the action, where do I park some reminder in some trusted system? And fourthly, being able to use the system in a review and reflection process so that you see the whole picture of all your commitments, so you're making trusted choices. So if you want to know the hardest thing, call all of it. Every one of those things is where people can oftentimes fall off. They don't capture everything. They don't clarify next actions on things when things first show up. They don't organize things in some trusted way, and they don't, step back and review and reflect on the whole thing. So these are simple behaviors. They're not hard to do. I mean, we all can do them, but doing them in a systematic method and doing them completely makes a totally big difference. But again, you're not born doing that. You actually have to train yourself to do those behaviors regularly.
Because that's not natural, as you said already.
Yeah, well, it might be natural, but it's not normal.
Okay, maybe the final status is something like, you call it mind like water.
Yeah, I use that martial arts term. It just means you are appropriately engaged, like water is always appropriately engaged with its environment. It's not confused about what to do. So the end state is that you are appropriately engaged with all of your commitments so that you're present with whatever you're doing. Because that's the most productive state to operate from. It's the best state to hit a golf ball from, or cook spaghetti from, or to have a difficult conversation from, is when nothing is on your mind except that. And so this is really about getting clarity so that you're present with wherever you put your focus.
What do you think currently about human multitasking?
Well, you can't. Multitasking is what you're doing when you drive home and you wonder who drove. In other words, when you have a lot of unconscious things that are on automatic, you can be doing a lot of things. You can be running and thinking of other things while you're running or walking. But to consciously put your focus on more than one thing, you can't do. It's impossible. So what most people mean by multitasking is switching focus, that and then an interruption and then that and then social media and then whatever. That's not multitasking. It's trying to switch your focus. And the problem is that unless you have placeholders for all of those, some part of you says, well, I stopped doing that and I needed that, but I'm still doing that. That is what creates a lot of the stress. And it undermines your ability to actually perform very well.
Actually, did you experience multitasking in your life, maybe earlier, or you are too organized not to do that?
Not so much. I mean, I learned a lot of this piece by piece as my life was getting more complex. So as my life was getting more complex, I was learning the systematic way to keep myself really clear, because I learned, I got a black belt in karate when I was in my 20s, and I learned how important it is to have nothing on your mind, to be in a clear space. If you're attacked by 4 people in a dark alley, you do not want 2,000 emails hanging in your head somewhere. You need to be clear. And so I learned clarity, and so I learned these techniques as a way to stay clear as my life got more complex and busy.
Do you think the paper is making something like comeback, or?
Well, I think people over time have realized that there's some things that your brain works better with in a physical paper form than in the digital form. I used a paper planner for over 20 years, and that's probably the best tool to be able to see the whole inventory of all of your life very quickly. It's very hard to do that on a computer and on a computer screen to see all the different aspects. It's actually easier to do that in a paper form, but either one has its advantages. And I know a number of high-tech people that are actually going back to paper to organize themselves these days, because especially if you have a short attention span, you don't have all the attention you need to keep going into the computer all the time. And it's much more in your face, it's much more available to you, and much easier for some people to be reminded of things. It's in a physical form.
Can you tell our viewers what mobile apps do you use for productivity or time management?
Well, my capture tool is low tech. Here's my capture tool, I've used for 35 years. This is like capturing ideas wherever and whenever they occur. But this isn't my organization system. These get torn off, and then I decide to clarify actions and outcomes out of this. And then I park the reminders, and my lists are in a digital form. I still use what they used to call Lotus Notes, and now it's IBM Notes, and kind of similar to Outlook. And I use the task function inside of that to keep my lists. And I use a lot of other tools. I use Word and Excel and Evernote and Dropbox, all those typical kind of digital tools. I pretty much live in a virtual world that way.
Actually, do you own a smartphone?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I have an iPad and a smartphone, and and my MacBook. So yeah.
Okay. If we can take a look to the future, can you see any main trends?
The only trends that have really happened, sure, there have been a lot of very cool things that have shown up in the digital world, but primarily all they've done is speed things up and add volume. The real game changers were word processors and spreadsheets and relational databases. Those changed the game. But since then, not a whole lot has changed the game, other than just giving you a lot more stuff a lot faster. And you're able to store a lot more things and get to those things a lot faster and be able to see a lot more. And all that's doing is adding the confusion we talked about to begin with. You have so many things to choose between. It's kind of the stress of opportunity. Which website should I surf? Which app should I use for this? Does this go into Evernote? Does it go into Dropbox? Everybody thinks the computer was going to simplify their life. Think again.
Do you think there are the methods which are good to connect with GTD, and they will create together better productivity ecosystem?
Well, GTD is really a meta system. It helps you then manage your systems, however you do that. So, we're teaching 8, 9, and 10-year-olds this in school, so their system's going to look quite different than the CTO of a major corporation that's managing 140 projects. But the same principles will still apply. When people implement the getting things done methodology, it makes everything work better. So all your initiatives, all those things, people will be able to implement those much better. Especially in the digital world where they have Agile and Scrum and Lean and all of those kinds of, the sort of new workflow processes. Those are all great, but they deal with the external workflow. This deals with your internal workflow. Somebody called getting things done lean for the brain. No wasted thinking.
Okay. Thank you for speaking with BraveShow TV.
My pleasure, Roma.